This is the third installment on deriving the laws. In the last lesson, we reviewed some general principles of the Noahide laws. Most importantly, we saw that the 7 categories included both positive and negative commandments. In this lesson, we will continue with the commandments of blasphemy, idolatry, and take a look at the aspects of each. First, blasphemy. This specific prohibition of blasphemy is called such for a lack of appropriate English term with which to translate the original Hebrew. In English, the word blasphemy is often used interchangeably with heresy. Alternatively, many use blasphemy to take the Lord's name in vain. However, neither of these uses convey the actual intent of the Hebrew prohibition. The definition of this prohibition is found in Leviticus 24:15 through 16. It says, "Any man who curses God shall bear his sin, and anyone who is nokev or curses the name of God shall be put to death." If you'll look at the Hebrew, if you have a Chumash, you'll notice there are two Hebrew words that are used for the same English translated word curse, hakael and nokev. The first time the Torah mentions this sin, it uses the word, yekelel, which clearly means to curse. In fact, this is the term used most often in connection to this transgression. However, in verse 16, the Torah uses an odd word, nokev. The Mishnah explains that nokev refers to cursing God using his own divine name in the formula. Now, I want to be careful how to do this, but hopefully you understand. It would be like saying, "May blank," the sacred name, "be cursed or smitten," and uttering the name again. This is a specific definition of blasphemy, warranting the death penalty. The Talmud expands the scope of this prohibition to include all divine names or appellations of God's divine attributes. Now, numerous other prohibitions are included under the umbrella of blasphemy. These include not desecrating, destroying, or erasing the names of God, using God's name inappropriately, and many others. Let's examine the idea of belief in God and the Noahide. As it was noted in previous lessons, the 7 Noahide laws are enumerated according to their negative, "thou shalt not" aspect, and nevertheless they contain many positive ones, "thou shalt" qualities. Rabbi Reuven Margolis, an eminent 20th century scholar, observes an important such nuance in Margolis Hayam, his masterful commentary on Tractate Sanhedrin, where most of the Noahide laws are discussed. It is astonishing that there is no mention here in the Sheva Mitzvot, or the 7 Noahide laws, a foremost principle, the fundamental of all fundamentals, belief in God. It is belief in God that must serve as a foundation for all mitzvahs and prohibitions, it states. It seems as though belief in God is subsumed in the category of blasphemy. That belief in God is required of Noahides, is iterated by many authorities. However, the proposition that it falls under the category of blasphemy is surprisingly. Wouldn't it make more sense for belief in God to be subsumed in the laws of idolatry? Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, in his book, The 7 Laws of Noah, asks the same question and offers a very good answer. He states, "The laws of idolatry regulate man's relationship with the physical world, keeping this world's meaning and value in perspective. However, the laws against blasphemy define the nature and boundaries of man's relationship with his Creator. Therefore, belief in God and all other elements in the man-God interaction are included under blasphemy." Interesting. Let's examine prayer. Prayer following this rule should therefore be included under blasphemy. However, is there an obligation for Noahides to pray? Rabbi Nissim Gaon implies such, writing, he states, "Not all of the 7 laws and their derivations require revelation. For example, the obligation to recognize God, to obey Him, and the obligation to serve Him, and all of which are rational and can logically be derived." The Hebrew term used, Rabbi Nissim, for serving God is avdo, usually refers to specifically to prayer. The mitzvah of prayer for Noahides is further implied by Isaiah 56:7, very familiar passage. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. On the verse that I just quoted, Rashi notes this. Not all Israel alone, also Rabbi Shmuel ben Kofni Gaon, in his exposition on the Noahide laws, includes prayer as an obligation, as do many later authorities. Yet, even though a few later authorities do not reckon prayer as an actual obligation, nevertheless agree that it is proper that Noahides are rewarded for prayer. The study of Torah, being intrinsic to the man-God relationship, is also included under the rubric of blasphemy. By extension, the mitzvah to honor the Torah and its Torah scholars is important. Let's examine idolatry, a very important, poignant concept that must be understood by Noahides and Jews so that they can direct the non-Jew to a better, more authentic relationship with God. The prohibition of idolatry for both Jews and non-Jews contains many nuanced details explaining the distinction between idolatrous thoughts and idolatrous deeds. Both of these are prohibited in different ways. The exact details involved in pinning down idolatrous thoughts versus deeds will be covered in this course in the appropriate place. Maimonides writes that any act of idolatry, idol worship, that is a capital offense for Jews is likewise a capital offense for Noahides. In general, this establishes similarities between the Jew and the Noahide. With regard to the laws of idolatry, we say in general, because there is a few important exceptions, one of these differences is the issue of shituf. Please write this word down. Shituf is a very important word. Shituf is the belief in some other false deity, in addition to believing in the one true God. An example of shituf would have been when the golden calf was made and the idolaters were there to worship God in the image of the calf. Or another example would be the 10 northern tribes providing or bringing a sacrifice to Hashem on an idol pagan altar. Now, while shituf is prohibited belief for Jews, its relevance to Noahides and non-Jews is nuanced and often a source of much confusion. Notice that I make a distinction between Noahides and non-Jews. Non-Jews are a category of people who do not necessarily believe in the authority of Torah or that there is one true God and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, with that being said, Maimonides and many other authorities condemn shituf, belief, as outright idolatry, even for the Noahides. However, this conclusion is hard to reconcile against Tosafot and other Rishonim. These authorities discuss the section of the Talmud that discusses if Gentiles may swear oaths in the name of God and or other deities. It is strongly implied that shituf is not a prohibition for non-Jews. The majority of later authorities conclude that shituf is permitted for non-Jews. Notice, permitted for non-Jews, not necessarily for Noahides. However, it is permitted only according to the very specific conditions. Number one, the Jewish Torah views non-Jews' belief in another God, in addition to the one true God, to be mistaken, meaning they are doing it out of misunderstanding. It is not a prohibition, but it is unrighteous, and one who does so, though not viewed as a sinner, is not considered a pious of the nation, and will not receive his full reward for observing the Noahide laws. Number two, shituf pertains only to the belief in a secondary divine being, not to worship of any other secondary god. Any expression of worship for the secondary deity is prohibited as idolatrous practice. Number three, it is only the belief in another god, in addition to the one true God, that is not punishable. A conflation of the true God with any other deity, or the assigning of corporeality to the true one God, creates issues, of actual idolatry. The Torah of idolatry is not only limited to the worship of idols, but pertains to how we conceive and represent the nature of the one true God. Now, many have tried to qualify Christianity as an acceptable belief for non-Jews using the concept of shituf. Though true that many authorities have stated Christianity is acceptable for non-Jews, this option must be put into context. The status of Christianity in the eyes of the Torah is difficult to determine. There have been thousands of pages written on this topic, and even basic survey of the literature is far beyond the scope of this course. In short, Christianity has many elements that are clearly idolatrous from a Torah perspective. There are its various rituals and modes of worship, but some that are difficult to pin down. For example, is it truly monotheistic or is it polytheistic? Its difficult status makes this classification doubtful and uncertain. Historically, Sephardic rabbis living in Muslim lands were free to rule stringently. They criticized Christians' belief as outright idolatry. However, rabbis living in Christian lands had to be very clever and cautious in what they said and wrote. Given the shadow of the church and the constant threat of exile and death, they were not free to classify idolatry as outright idolatry. Given their precarious situation, they had to take a tempered position. In these rabbis' writings, in theological writings, they often declare Christian belief shituf and therefore acceptable for non-Jews. However, in their writings on halakha, Torah law, they held that Christian ritual and worship has to be treated as idolatry. They often are able to get these views past censors because halakha legal writings were not so thoroughly vetted by the Catholic Church, and they usually lack sufficient understanding of the material or the language. Whereas not for the threat of the church, these Ashkenaz rabbis very well may have taken a straight view of their Sephardic co-religionists, and it's condemning Christianity as idolatry. Nevertheless, even if Christian belief is shituf, the practice of Christianity would remain idolatrous. The practical conclusion, for a number of reasons, is that Christianity is to be treated as absolute idolatry. Namely, it is not merely the worship of another secondary deity, but it is an idolatrous conception of God himself. Therefore, Christianity is to be treated as absolute idolatry for Noahides with both belief and practice. What is Islam? Islam is not idolatrous and rather has a strong theological resonance with Torah, thought and belief. From the perspective of the prohibition of idolatry, it is 100% monotheistic and acceptable belief system. However, Islam itself presents a very different problem altogether. Let's briefly talk about creating new religions. Both Jews and non-Jews are enjoined against the creation of new religions. One who creates a new religion is by default rejecting belief in the true God and Torah. Moses, the greatest prophet in history, and his authority. The Torah, containing both the Noahide and Jewish laws, were given to stand for all eternity. The Torah states that this in no fewer than 24 places. New religions denying the eternal authority of God and the Torah are not given legitimacy. These principles would apply equally to Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and any other religion coming after the Torah, regardless of whether or not these religions observe all or part of the Noahide laws. In the same vein, neither a Noahide nor a Jew may alter the religion set forth for him by the Torah. To do so is also the rejection of the Torah. God's will is that the de facto creation of a new religion, for example, a Noahide may not observe holy days not commanded upon him. This would include such holidays as Sabbath and Passover. These days are commanded only to the Jewish people. Similarly, mitzvahs and tefillin and symbols are commanded only to the Jews and not to the Noahides. To observe them would constitute the creation of a new religion, and one would receive no reward in their observance. However, Noahides may observe any commandment given to the Jews that, number one, has a logical reason behind it, and number two, is a positive benefit to a person or society. However, its intent cannot be to undertake the commandment solely because he believes it is a religious commandment to himself. If that were his understanding of the reason, he would be in error. And for this commandment is not only for the Jews and only for the Jews and not for Noahides. The furthermost authority on Jewish law in the 20th century, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, implicitly wrote that a Noahide who decides to keep Torah commandments intended only for the Jews receives no reward or blessing for his actions. Now let me pause there to say this. As a Noahide leader for a number of years, I've never known a Noahide that does any of the laws in the Torah for the purpose of reward. They've always done it for the purpose of love of Hashem and love for his Torah and love for the Jewish people. And so I want to make sure that any Jew that is concerned about that should not be concerned, because these people are not doing it for reward. Rather, and this is to continue on the concept, rather he transgressed by creating a new religion, as we can see. This does not preclude Noahide observance in any other mitzvot of the Torah. We will examine this issue in depth in the future on another lesson. To summarize, one cannot be a Christian, Noahide, because Christianity is idolatrous. In both beliefs and practices, Islam is a new post-Torah religion and therefore denies the eternality of the Torah. What is more, one cannot even be a Jew, Noahide. The Noahide path is not a way for non-Jews to participate in Jewish ritual or religion. It is a way for them to be non-Jews according to God's will. As Noahides, in the next lesson, we'll continue with an overview of the Sheva Mitzvot. In conclusion, the section that states that a Noahide should not observe the certain holidays that were given or certain feast days that were given to the Jews must also remember to memorialize or to honor those specific days by studying material that contains information about how the Jews do it and why they do it is just as honorable. And without trying to imitate each one of these holidays, one can still honor these holidays with great spiritual elevation. This concludes this lesson, and we'll continue on next class. Shalom.